Welcome back. Deputy ministers cost the taxpayers more than 300 million rand per year. And with the South African government often citing cash crunches and austerity measures, calls to scrap the position entirely are growing. ActionSA says the staggering cost of a bloated cabinet expansion is a burden on taxpayers. For more on this, we are joined by ActionSA's parliamentary leader, Athol Trollip. Athol, a very good evening to you. Thank you so much for your time. Now, as we know, the GNU has come with an extended cabinet from 30 to 32 ministers and from 36 to 43 deputy ministers. Now, how do we equate that into rands and cents for us as taxpayers?
Good evening, Massa, and good evening to your viewers. First of all, I think you used the figure 600,000. That's what the cabinet costs in salaries alone. And deputy ministers cost around 313 million rand just in salaries. Now, you must remember that each deputy minister will earn costs around 7.4 million rand per annum, and each minister costs around 8.9 million per annum. And then, of course, there are additional costs over and above salaries. Each deputy minister has a motor car, one in Cape Town, one in Pretoria. They have housing in both centers. They have VIP details that protect them. They have staff that are appointed to them to provide backup services. So what we've seen is that we had President Ramaphosa in his first term of office pledging that he would reduce the size of his cabinet. And most of the political parties that campaigned in the 2024 election were demanding a reduction in the size of cabinet. And what has happened is when the GNU came around, instead of actually reducing his cabinet, Ramaphosa increased his cabinet, 32 ministers and 43 deputies. That's a lot of people. And all the parties that were campaigning to reduce the size of cabinet simply fell into the new cabinet and are now enjoying the perks of being ministers and deputy ministers.
And, before we even get back into those perks as well, I just wanted to go back to basics. What do deputy ministers actually do?
Well, there was a classic example, and let me keep it current. When Minister Mkunu, the Minister of Police, was placed on special leave, one would have thought that the president would have selected one of the two deputy ministers of police and promoted them to become the Minister of Police, because he said at the time it was a caretaker position. But instead he had to go outside of Parliament to go and find Feroz Kachalia in academia and appointed him as an acting minister. And Feroz Kachalia quickly pointed out that there's no constitutional provision for an acting minister. So what we've got now is we've got two ministers of police, one on special leave, and one newly on the job, who didn't even know that there were two deputy ministers. He's obviously discovered to his surprise that there are two deputy ministers. And one of those deputy ministers, Kasal Matale, told the ad hoc commission in Parliament that after 16 months in the post, he had no formal job description. He had no delegation of authority or special delegations. So he simply just, went to work every day. Now, he could just as well have done that as a member of Parliament, because what we've seen is Parliament has 400 members, and there are 75 members in the cabinet. So that cabinet takes up a large proportion of Parliament. And if deputy ministers don't even have job descriptions, one asks the question, how do you monitor their performance? Because without a job description, there's no ways of monitoring anyone's performance. And that's been a weakness with Cyril Ramaphosa. He said there'd be lifestyle audits of his ministers. There isn't any. He said that they would have performance contracts. They don't have performance contracts. And now we've got deputy ministers telling us that they're busy, but they don't have a job description. So as far as we're concerned in ActionSA, they are redundant. They cost us too much money. We can't afford the cabinet of that size. And we believe the best way to trim it down is to get rid of all the deputy ministers and make a constitutional amendment. And that's why I've brought a constitutional amendment to change the constitution to do away with deputy ministers.
And speaking of that constitutional amendment, as well as part of ActionSA's solutions to this bloated cabinet problem, you're also talking about it being leaner, cutting it down to about 20 ministers and curtailing these perks as well. As we started this conversation, Athol, you also mentioned some of the perks like vehicles in Pretoria and one in Cape Town. What would you say some of the other perks could be that could be done away with?
Well, first of all, my colleague Alan Beasley in Parliament has brought a private member's bill called the Cut Cabinet Perks Bill. And the perks that we're looking at cutting are the allocation of VIP protection services. They cost hundreds and hundreds of millions of rands. And we've seen during the Matlanga Commission inquiry and the ad hoc committee in Parliament that our police are severely under-resourced and underfunded. So if we remove the massive VIP security details, we've seen recently in a court case where the Deputy President, Paul Mashatile's VIP protection services, about 8 of them, pushed a driver, a civilian, off the road and proceeded to assault him. Now, is it necessary to have 8 or more people accompanying you as the Deputy President? I saw Cyril Ramaphosa coming just before the 2024 elections, came to Nelson Mandela Bay, and he had a 16-car convoy accompanying him to have lunch at the Brooks Hill Pavilion in Nelson Mandela Bay. We believe that's way too excessive. And then, of course, there are lots of other perks that we believe are far too excessive. You know, business class flights, 2 homes, very costly motor cars in excess of R1 million each. Yes, some of the ministers say that they're driving old cars, but there's a ministerial handbook that allows them to buy cars in excess of R1 million. So they have 2 of those. And also they have large contingents of staff that we think are superfluous, because each department that they head up have got lots of officials that provide ministers with backup staff and support services. So we don't believe that we should be spending all of this money on the cabinet, especially if it's that size. We've seen many countries much bigger than our own, with much bigger economies and much bigger populations, that are run with 20 ministers and no deputy ministers. So why should it be different in South Africa? Obviously, what's happened with the advent of the GNU is that Cyril Ramaphosa has kept the cabinet the size that it was and just added GNU positions. So it's clearly just a patronage system where you come on board and we'll give you jobs and we'll make sure that you are kept comfortable and to keep you in the GNU. Now, I don't believe that citizens should be paying for that.
Athol Trollip, really appreciate your time. Really appreciate that. That was, of course, ActionSA parliamentary leader Athol Trollip.